The winter of 1912 proved merciless along the Wyoming frontier. It was a season that tested not just the physical endurance of those who dared to live beyond civilization's reach, but the very foundations of human compassion. In the small mining town of Copperfield, established in the shadow of the Laramie Mountains, the cold penetrated deeper than mere earth and timber. It seeped into hearts and twisted the very bonds that should have protected the vulnerable. This is the story of Eleanor Parker, a young widow of 28 winters, who learned too late that grief and desperation could make strangers of those she'd known since childhood. Her tale intertwines with that of Jonas Walker, a solitary Apache scout whose own tragedy had led him to wander the frozen wilderness on that fateful December night. In the unforgiving landscape of Wyoming territory, two lost souls would collide, in circumstances that would forever change the meaning of survival, compassion, and what it truly means to find sanctuary in the darkest of times. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Copperfield was barely a smudge on any official map, a collection of weathered wooden buildings that clung to the base of Copper Ridge like barnacles on a ship's hull. Its lifeblood flowed from the Bennett mine, where copper veins ran rich, and deep through the mountain's core, the town had exploded into existence just 5 years prior, drawing desperate men from across the territory with promises of wealth that proved elusive for most. Among the first to arrive had been Thomas Parker and his young bride, Eleanor. Thomas possessed both the strength for backbreaking labor and the keen eye needed to spot ore-rich veins that others missed. Within 2 years, he'd become the mine's most valued foreman, and Eleanor had transformed their simple cabin into something resembling a proper home. She established the town's first school, teaching the children of miners in her front parlor when the weather permitted. But prosperity on the frontier remained as precarious as a house of cards in a windstorm. In October 1911, a cave-in had trapped 12 miners deep within Copper Ridge's belly. Thomas Parker had led the rescue effort, his knowledge of the mine's passages proving invaluable in the desperate dig. They saved 8 men. But Thomas himself hadn't emerged. The mountain had claimed its price for the lives it surrendered. Eleanor's world had shattered with the finality of the stone that crushed her husband's last breath. At 27, she found herself alone with 2 children. Mary, a bright girl of 6, who possessed her father's determined chin and her mother's gentle green eyes, and Thomas Jr., called Tommy, a sturdy boy of 4 who already showed signs of his father's remarkable strength and keen observation. The mining company, in what passed for generosity, had provided a widow's stipend for 3 months and the right to remain in the company cabin through the winter. But money ran thin when spent on survival, and the cabin grew cold despite the presence of 4 walls and a roof. December arrived with a vengeance that even old-timers hadn't witnessed before. The first blizzard dumped 3 feet of snow in 2 days, transforming familiar pathways into treacherous mazes. The wind howled with a voice that seemed almost human in its anguish, whistling through gaps in cabin walls and finding weakness where none had existed before. On the morning of December 15th, Eleanor stood in her small kitchen, dividing the last of their flour between 2 cracked bowls. The children sat at the rough-hewn table, their faces gaunt despite her best efforts to maintain normalcy through regular meals and cheerful conversation. "Tommy, don't poke at your oatmeal," she gently scolded, though her own stomach cramped with hunger. "Eat it while it's warm." "It's not sweet like Papa used to make it," the child observed, his words cutting deeper than any knife could have. Mary, wise beyond her years, reached across to pat her brother's hand. "Papa would want us to be brave and eat what we have. Remember what Mama taught us about pioneers." Eleanor's heart both swelled and shattered at her daughter's maturity. The girl had grown up too quickly since Thomas's death, often displaying a protective instinct toward her younger brother that mirrored Eleanor's own determination to shield them from the full weight of their circumstances. A sharp knock at the door interrupted their meager breakfast. Through the frosted window, Eleanor could make out the rigid form of Mrs. Abigail Whitmore, the mine owner's wife and self-appointed guardian of Copperfield's moral standards. She rarely visited Cabin Row, where the miners' families lived, preferring the elevated position of her substantial house on Prospect Hill. Eleanor opened the door to admit the woman, noting immediately the three men who accompanied her. Mr. Henry Whitmore himself, the mine's owner, Reverend Charles Blake, whose sermons often focused on the wages of sin, and Deputy Marshal Frank Coleman, his hand resting deliberately on the holstered pistol at his hip. "Mrs. Parker," Abigail Whitmore began. Without preamble, her voice sharp as winter wind, "we need to discuss your continued residence in company housing." Eleanor felt her children move to flank her, Tommy clinging to her skirts, while Mary stood with unnatural stillness. The adults filled her small front room, their presence oppressive in its authority. "You were informed," Henry Whitmore continued, consulting a ledger he'd brought, "that widows' accommodations extend only through the transition period. Your late husband's services, while valued, do not obligate the company to indefinite support." "I understood the terms," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the trembling that had begun in her hands. "But the winter has proven harsh, and I've been seeking employment." "Employment?" Reverend Blake interrupted, his tone suggesting she'd uttered blasphemy. "A woman in your position should be seeking the protection of family, not competing for wages meant to support actual miners." "I have no family," Eleanor stated simply. "My parents passed before I married. Thomas had a sister in Kansas, but I've received no response to my letters." "Kansas," Abigail Whitmore repeated with visible disapproval. "How convenient that your claimed relatives remain silent while you make demands upon this community's charity." Eleanor's cheeks flushed with anger and shame. "I've made no demands. I teach the miners' children, tend their sick. Activities that earn you goodwill but no income." Whitmore interrupted bluntly. "The cabin you occupy could house a family with an active wage earner. We cannot maintain charity cases when spring brings new workers." Deputy Coleman shifted his weight, the floorboards creaking under his substantial frame. His presence made the conversation feel less like a discussion and more like an eviction notice delivered by armed escort. "The train leaves for Cheyenne tomorrow," Coleman stated, as if presenting a solution rather than an ultimatum. "Last run before the mountain passes become impassable. You'll need to be on it." Eleanor's mind raced through rapidly dwindling options. Cheyenne was a 2-day journey in good weather. In this winter it might take twice as long. With her meager savings and 2 children, she had neither the resources for passage nor the certainty of employment once arriving. "The mine closure for the holidays begins tomorrow," Whitmore added, closing his ledger with finality. "We cannot spare men to maintain heat in cabins during the shutdown. The main quarters will house essential staff only." "But the children," Eleanor protested, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "Surely the town wouldn't turn out a mother and her children in the dead of winter." "The town has provided abundantly," Abigail Whitmore proclaimed, adjusting a heavy woolen cloak. 3 months of housing, a widow's pension, and the collective patience of God-fearing people. We cannot be expected to sacrifice our own family's welfare indefinitely." Reverend Blake stepped forward, producing a small Bible from his coat pocket. "Perhaps you might seek guidance in prayer, Mrs. Parker. The Lord provides for those who place their faith correctly." His emphasis suggested her faith had been misplaced, though in what manner remained deliberately vague. As the delegation prepared to leave, Whitmore paused at the threshold. "You have until tomorrow at noon. The cabin must be vacated and cleaned." For the next occupants, Coleman will return to ensure compliance. The door closed behind them with a finality that echoed in Eleanor's bones. She gathered her children close, feeling their warmth as the chill of reality seeped through cracks in both cabin walls and her resolve. "Mama?" Mary asked, her voice small but brave. "Where will we go?" Eleanor looked down at their upturned faces, innocent and trusting despite the conversations they'd overheard. Thomas's green eyes stared back at her through his daughter's determined gaze, while Tommy's sturdy frame pressed against her leg reminded her of the strength she must somehow find. "We'll think of something," she promised, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. There must be somewhere. But as she surveyed their cabin, already stripped of anything valuable, furnishings reduced to essentials, Eleanor realized the brutal truth. In a frontier town where survival depended on contribution, a widow with 2 children represented a burden few could afford to shoulder. The remainder of that day passed in a blur of desperate activity. Eleanor packed their belongings into 2 travel bags, her mind racing through contingencies. Mr. Foster, who ran the general store, had always been kind. Perhaps she could work there, cleaning or stocking shelves, in exchange for their keeping room. The Hendersons had shown sympathy at Thomas's funeral. Maybe they would allow the children to stay with them while she sought employment in Cheyenne. But each option withered under scrutiny. Foster's store ran on credit extended to mining families. He couldn't afford additional strain. The Hendersons had 5 children of their own in a cabin smaller than Eleanor's. Every family in Copperfield operated on the knife's edge of subsistence, where taking in strays could mean starvation for all. As evening approached, Eleanor made her final preparations. She fed the children the last of their food, a thin soup stretched with melted snow, and tucked them into bed early. Mary had absorbed their gravity of their situation with the solemnity of a child forced to mature too quickly, while Tommy still retained enough innocence to view their impending journey as an adventure. "Will we see Papa in Cheyenne?" Tommy asked. As Eleanor adjusted his blankets, the question pierced her heart. She'd been careful not to lie to her children about death, but neither had she wanted to extinguish all hope in their young lives. "Papa watches over us wherever we go," she answered carefully. "He'd want us to be brave and take care of each other." After the children fell asleep, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table by lamplight, counting her remaining money. $47.36. The train ticket to Cheyenne would cost $12 for all 3 of them. That left barely enough for a few days' lodging while she sought work, with nothing for food during the journey. A sharp rap at the door startled her from her calculations. Opening it, she found a group of 5 men from the mining crew, led by Big Jim Sullivan, who had worked alongside Thomas in the mine. They held their hats in their rough hands, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and embarrassment. "Evening. Mrs. Parker," Sullivan began, his voice gruff with emotion. We heard, the boys and I, we took up a collection." He extended a worn cloth pouch that clinked with the promise of coins. Eleanor hesitated, pride warring with necessity. "We know you wouldn't ask," continued Henry Miller, a young miner who had boarded with the Parkers when he first arrived in Copperfield. "But Tom was one of us, saved my life twice down in those shafts. This ain't charity, it's paying a debt." The other miners nodded in agreement, their faces showing the same determination that had characterized Thomas Parker's approach to both life and work. "I don't know what to say," Eleanor managed, emotion constricting her throat. "Don't say nothing," Sullivan advised. "Just take care of them young'uns. Tom would have done the same for any of our families." After the miners departed, Eleanor opened the pouch with trembling fingers. Inside lay silver dollars, worn quarters, and even some crumpled paper money, $34.25. Sense. Added to her savings, she now had enough to reach Cheyenne with a small cushion for immediate needs. But relief proved short-lived. Even as she carefully counted and recounted the money, a more pressing problem demanded attention. The temperature had dropped significantly after sunset, and despite the pot-bellied stove burning steadily, the cabin grew increasingly cold. The children's breathing misted in the air, visible proof of winter's encroachment. Eleanor banked the fire carefully, knowing she needed to conserve fuel through the night. Tomorrow morning, she would need to be ready when Deputy Coleman arrived. The confrontation with the Whitmores had made clear there would be no mercy if she delayed. Sleep eluded her that night. She sat wrapped in a quilt by the dying fire, listening to the wind howl around the cabin's corners. Each gust seemed to carry voices. Thomas's laugh, the children's future cries, the judgment of the townspeople who had smiled at her funeral and turned cold faces when charity proved inconvenient. Near dawn, Eleanor dozed fitfully, only to be awakened by an unfamiliar sound. Through the frosted window, she could see nothing but white darkness. The sound came again, not wind this time, but something deliberately rhythmic. Horses. No, too slow, too careful. Moving quietly to avoid disturbing the children, she crept to the front window and scraped away a circle of frost. What she saw made her blood run colder than the winter air. A figure moved past her cabin in the pre-dawn. Gloom, tall and deliberately silent. Not one of the miners heading to work. They walked in groups, talking and laughing. This traveler kept to the shadows, appearing to study each cabin as he passed. As the figure drew nearer, Eleanor could make out more details. He walked with a distinctive gait that suggested moccasins rather than heavy boots. His clothing appeared to be a mixture of hide and cloth, and something about his bearing, proud, alert, contained, marked him as different from the usual traffic. In Copperfield, for a moment their eyes met through the window. Even in the darkness, she could see his features clearly. High cheekbones, dark eyes that seemed to hold both wariness and curiosity, long black hair bound in a single braid. An Apache scout, if she recognized the tribal marks correctly from her father's old books about the Western Territories. The stranger paused, then continued his silent progress through the sleeping town. Eleanor remained at the window long after he disappeared, wondering what brought such a solitary traveler to Copperfield in the depths of winter. Most Apache avoided mining towns, especially during the hostile season when tempers ran as short. As supplies, little did she know that this chance encounter would soon prove significant to her family's fate. For now, she turned back to her packing. The stranger's visit merely one more element in a morning already fraught with uncertainty and fear. As the first grey light of dawn crept across the snow-covered landscape, Eleanor Parker prepared to face the unknown with her children at her side. The cruel arithmetic of frontier survival had rendered its verdict. They must leave Copperfield, willing or not. Where they would go, how they would survive, these questions remained unanswered in the harsh mathematics of winter survival. But sometimes, in the darkest moments, salvation arrives from the most unexpected quarters. The true test of Eleanor Parker's strength was about to begin. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Morning arrived with the clarity that only extreme cold can bring. Eleanor had barely slept 3 hours when the sound of heavy boots on her porch steps jolted her awake. Through the window, she could see Deputy Coleman stamping snow from his feet, accompanied by 2 men with a wagon, the Brewster brothers, who handled dead and luggage for the railway station. "Mrs. Parker," Coleman called, hammering the door with his fist. "It's past 7. You were instructed to be ready." Eleanor quickly dressed, shaking the children awake with gentle urgency. Mary's eyes opened, alert and aware, while Tommy needed more coaxing, his small body resistant to leaving the warmth of his bed. "Remember our adventure?" Eleanor whispered to him, forcing lightness into her voice. "Today we start our journey." The deputy's impatience grew louder. "Mrs. Parker, I'm authorized to enforce eviction, if necessary." "We're coming," she called back, hastily buttoning Tommy's coat. Their bags stood ready by the door, everything they owned reduced to 2 traveling cases and a canvas satchel she had wrapped. The children's most precious possessions, Mary's rag doll and Tommy's carved horse from his father, in extra clothing for protection. Opening the door admitted a blast of Arctic air that made the children gasp. Coleman's stern face softened only slightly at the sight of them, though his companion's expressions remained impassive. "Train leaves at 9, Coleman stated. "Brewster's will take you to the station. No charge, Mr. Whitmore's orders." "How generous," Eleanor murmured, unable to mask her bitterness entirely. Coleman had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Look, Mrs. Parker, I've got children myself. This isn't... I'm just doing my job. The mine comes first in this town." She nodded, understanding the pecking order that made such cruelty possible. Even those with sympathy lacked the power to change the system that funded their own survival. The ride to the station proved a study in growing dread. Eleanor sat between her children in the wagon's bed, their small bodies pressed against her for warmth and comfort. The town appeared different from this perspective. Not the hopeful frontier settlement she'd arrived in 5 years ago, but a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the inevitability of winter, each inhabitant fighting their own daily battle for survival. They passed the schoolhouse where she'd taught lessons. Its windows were dark, classes suspended for the mining shutdown. Mrs. Kendrick, who sometimes assisted with teaching, watched from her cabin window and quickly drew her curtain when their eyes met. "Mama?" Mary asked quietly. "Why don't they want us anymore?" The question, so simply stated, contained complexities Eleanor struggled to answer without destroying her daughter's faith in human nature. "People get scared in winter, sweetheart. They worry about having enough for their own families. Papa would have shared," the child stated with certainty. Eleanor swallowed hard. Yes, Papa would have shared. At the station, chaos reigned despite the early hour. The last train before the mountain passes became impassable, drew passengers from throughout the territory. Cowboys heading south for the winter, merchants completing final deliveries, families relocating to warmer climates, all gathered on the wine-swept platform. The station master, Mr. Pierce, checked his pocket watch repeatedly, his anxiety increasing with each minute. "Track crew reports fresh snow on Laramie Summit. If we don't depart by 9 sharp, we might not make it through." Eleanor purchased their tickets with shaking hands, watching precious dollars change hands for 3 pieces of cardboard that represented either salvation or merely delayed doom. She had no destination beyond Cheyenne, no plan except finding work that could sustain them. But any future seemed preferable to watching her children slowly starve in a town that had turned its back on them. The train appeared through the snow like a mechanical beast, its black engine breathing steam that dissipated in the frigid air. Other passengers hurried to board, eager to escape the biting wind. Eleanor lifted Tommy to carry him up the steep steps, Mary climbing close behind with determined independence. Inside, they found seats in the second-class car, worn wooden benches, that offered little comfort but adequate warmth once away from the door. Other passengers glanced at them with varying degrees of curiosity and sympathy. A young mother traveling alone with children always drew attention on the frontier. Through the frosted window, Eleanor watched Copperfield recede as the train pulled. Away, the mountain that had claimed her husband dominated the horizon, its peak hidden in clouds that promised more snow. Everything she'd built here, friends, routine, identity as a schoolteacher and respected citizen, disappeared with each. Clack of the wheels on frozen tracks. Tommy pressed against her side, drowsy from the warmth. Mary maintained her vigil at the window, her young face reflecting a seriousness that belonged to one far older. Eleanor stroked her daughter's hair, wondering how much this experience would age them all. "Tickets, please." The conductor's call interrupted her thoughts. He worked his way down the aisle, punching holes in the small rectangles that validated each journey. When he reached them, his professional demeanor faltered slightly. "Mrs. Parker? I didn't expect to see you leaving." "Copperfield, Mr. Harris," she acknowledged. He'd been Thomas's childhood friend from Iowa, had stood at their wedding as witness. Circumstances require it. Harris glanced at the children, understanding dawning. The mine's decision about winter housing. It wasn't a question. "I'm sorry. Tom was a good man, none better." He held their tickets longer than necessary, wrestling with some internal debate. Finally, he bent closer and lowered his voice. "Storm's coming worse than they're saying. We might be stuck at Sweetwater Junction for days if the pass closes. Station there is primitive, no real facilities for children." Eleanor felt her carefully, constructed courage wavering. "What do you suggest?" Harris straightened, appearing to make a decision. "I can get you as far as Pine Ridge Crossing. There's a settlement there, not mapped official, but folks know it. Trading post, few families who stay through winter. Might be opportunity there that Cheyenne can't offer a woman alone." The change of plans sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with temperature. Pine Ridge Crossing wasn't on her mental map of Wyoming territory. Changing destinations meant abandoning what little strategy she'd managed to form. But Harris pressed on. "Station agent there owes me a favor. Name's Caleb Wilson. Tell him Bill Harris sent you. He might know of work, or at least temporary shelter until you figure your next move." Through the window, the landscape had become a blur of white, punctuated by dark pines. The train swayed as it climbed the initial grade toward the mountain pass, each mile taking them further from everything familiar. "Pine Ridge," Eleanor repeated, testing the name. It sounded like a frontier decision, vague, uncertain, dependent on the kindness of strangers. "It's a risk," Harris admitted, "but staying on this train with the weather turning might be a bigger one. Choice is yours, but you need to decide before we hit the junction." He moved on to check other tickets, leaving Eleanor to wrestle with a decision that could determine her children's fate. The train continued its steady progress up the mountain, steam engine laboring against gravity and snow. Mary noticed her mother's distress. At 6, she possessed an awareness that both comforted and worried Eleanor. Some children remained blissfully ignorant of adult concerns, but Mary had absorbed the realities of their situation with concerning clarity. "We'll be all right, Mama," the girl said softly, slipping her small hand into Eleanor's. "Papa used to say, we Parkers are made of strong stuff." The simple reassurance, offered from daughter to mother rather than the reverse, nearly broke Eleanor's carefully maintained composure. She gathered both children close, feeling their solid warmth, their trust, their belief that she would find a way through this trial. The train lurched suddenly, brakes engaged with a squeal of protest. Through windows now completely opaque with frost, passengers could see the conductor and engineer conferring urgently on the side of the track. Their gestures suggested trouble ahead. "What's happening?" asked a businessman seated across the aisle. Harris reappeared, his face grave. "Washout about 2 miles ahead. Storm damage from yesterday. They're saying it'll take hours to clear, maybe longer if the snow keeps up." A ripple of concern moved through the car. Hours of delay in this cold could mean more than inconvenience. The train's limited resources, food, heating, coal, patience, would be tested. "Pine Ridge isn't far from here," Harris added, speaking directly to Eleanor, though others listened. "Maybe 10 miles northwest. There's a post road that branches off at the water tower. Storm's moving in fast, but someone determined might make it before full dark." The implied suggestion hung in the air. Leave the relative safety of the train for an uncertain journey through mounting blizzard toward a settlement that might or might not offer sanctuary. Eleanor looked down at her children, so small and vulnerable, so dependent on her judgment. Through the window, she could just make out the water tower Harris mentioned, a dark silhouette against the white sky. Beyond it, a faint track disappeared into the storm-threatened forest. Pine Ridge Crossing. The name had transformed from abstract possibility to immediate choice. Other passengers began voicing their own concerns and plans. Some proposed organizing a work crew to help clear the washout. Others suggested rationing the limited food supplies on board. The businessman across from Eleanor revealed he carried essential medicines that needed to reach Cheyenne before they spoiled. But Eleanor's focus narrowed to the single decision before her. Stay with the train and face potential days of exposure with dwindling resources, or risk everything on a 10-mile journey to an unknown destination that might not even exist. Mama? Mary's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. The man on the trail last night, the one with the braid. Eleanor looked at her daughter, surprised. She thought the children had slept through her pre-dawn observation. What about him, sweetheart? I saw him too, Mary explained. He stopped outside our window, looked right at me, then he went that way. She pointed toward the northwest, the exact direction of Pine Ridge Crossing. The coincidence struck Eleanor with superstitious force. That silent figure who had passed through Copperfield before dawn, had he come from Pine Ridge? Was there meaning in the path he'd traveled, some sign she was meant to interpret? Did he seem threatening? She asked her daughter. Mary considered the question with characteristic seriousness. No, just watching, like he was remembering something. A commotion at the front of the car interrupted their conversation. Several men had decided to brave the weather and check the washout themselves, gather first-hand information about their options. Their boots and coats signaled the severity of conditions outside. Harris returned to Eleanor's seat as these men prepared to disembark. The decision point's coming, he warned. Another 20 minutes and the train will be fully committed to waiting out the weather here. You'd be locked into whatever happens next. Eleanor focused on facts rather than fears. Her money would last perhaps 2 weeks of careful economy. Finding work in Cheyenne with winter settling in would be challenging, especially with 2 young children to care for. The city attracted many, desperate people seeking the same opportunities. Pine Ridge Crossing, if it truly existed, might offer fewer people competing for whatever employment existed. Trading posts always needed help. Smaller settlements sometimes welcomed a school teacher, especially one willing to accept non-traditional payment. If I decide to go, she asked Harris, how would I find my way? The storm will make the path difficult to follow. Water Tower has a trail marker, he explained, used to be part of the old mining exploration routes. Follow it northwest for about 2 hours walking. He paused, then added, course, that's in good weather. With children, the unfinished sentence needed no completion. What might take a lone man 2 hours could require 4 or more for a mother burdened with small children and luggage. Through the window, the snow began falling harder. What had been occasional flakes transformed into a steady veil that reduced visibility to mere yards. The men who'd gone to inspect the washout returned quickly, stamping snow from their boots with urgent movements. Tracks worse than they thought, one reported, and there's another storm following this one. Might be days before we can move. The announcement sent another wave of anxiety through the passengers. Days trapped in a stationary train meant rapidly diminishing supplies, inadequate heating, and growing desperation. Eleanor felt the moment of decision compress around her like the tightening band of winter itself. Every choice carried risk. Every path led to uncertainty. But inaction, waiting for rescue that might be too late, felt like the greatest risk of all. She stood abruptly, gathering their bags with determined movements. "We're getting off here," she announced to her children. Mary nodded with quick understanding. already reaching for her coat. Tommy, still struggling to grasp their situation, looked up with sleepy curiosity. "Are we there yet?" Eleanor knelt before him, fastening his coat with swift efficiency. In his innocent question lay the truth of their circumstance. None of them knew where there might be, only that it wasn't here, wasn't the past they'd lost in Copperfield. "Mr. Harris," she called as they moved toward the exit, "will you give my regards to Caleb Wilson when you reach Cheyenne? Tell him Eleanor Parker is coming to Pine Ridge, though perhaps not by the route we planned." Harris started to offer some of final advice, but Eleanor had already turned away, leading her children toward the unknown challenge that waited beyond the train's protective walls. As they stepped onto the snow-covered platform beside the water tower, the full magnitude of winter's assault became immediately apparent. Wind drove the snowflakes horizontally, each gust a reminder of the vast distances between points of shelter on the Wyoming frontier. Eleanor looked back once at the train, its windows glowing warmly in the gathering gloom. Safety and community waited inside, but also the slow starvation of hope as resources dwindled and desperation grew. Ahead lay a barely visible trail disappearing into white uncertainty. 10 miles to Pine Ridge Crossing, 2 children depending on her strength and judgment. Everything they owned carried on her back and in her hands. "Remember our game about being brave pioneers?" she asked her children as they struck out along the trail. Both nodded, though their faces showed the strain of cold, even through scarves and hoods. "Today," Eleanor continued, setting a steady pace that wouldn't tire them too quickly, "we're not playing anymore. Today we become real pioneers." The trail led them northwest into the deepening heart of winter. Behind them, the train whistled once, a mournful sound that might have been farewell or warning. Eleanor didn't look back again. The path forward demanded all her attention now, as the light began to fail, transforming the white landscape into shades of gray and shadow. Eleanor Parker led her children toward an unknown destination, driven by necessity and guided by nothing more than hope and a stranger's uncertain directions. Pine Ridge Crossing waited somewhere ahead in the gathering darkness. Whether it would prove sanctuary or just another trial in their winter ordeal remained to be discovered. For now, Eleanor focused on the simple rhythm of walking. One step, then another, each foot placement a small victory against the mounting storm. The true test of their pioneer spirit was only beginning. The first hour proved manageable. The trail, though partially obscured by fresh snow, remained visible enough to follow. Eleanor maintained a steady pace, stopping every 15 minutes to check on the children's warmth and adjust their scarves. Mary trudged beside her with surprising stamina, while Tommy rode on her back when his short legs grew tired. "Tell us a story, Mama," Tommy requested from his perch, his arms tight around her neck. "Which story would you like?" Eleanor responded, grateful for the distraction from her growing anxiety about the journey. "The one about the dragon and the brave princess," Mary suggested. It had been Thomas's favorite tale to tell, though Eleanor suspected he invented most details based on the children's reactions. As she began the familiar narrative, Eleanor's mind worked on 2 levels, maintaining the rhythm of walking while calculating their progress. If Harris's estimate proved accurate, they should reach Pine Ridge Crossing before complete darkness fell. But the storm showed no signs of abating, and with each passing minute, the temperature seemed to drop further. By the time she reached the part where the princess discovered the dragon's secret kindness, Eleanor realized they were no longer alone. On the trail, at first, she thought it might be a wolf. The Wyoming wilderness held no shortage of predators, driven desperate by winter. But as the figure emerged from the swirling snow, she recognized human form rather than beast. The Apache scout from Copperfield stood perhaps 30 yards ahead on the trail, partially obscured by the heavy snowfall. He neither advanced nor retreated, simply waited with the stillness she'd noted during his passage through town. Eleanor halted, every instinct shifting to protectiveness. Her mind raced through possibilities. Coincidence that he traveled the same path, or something more dangerous? The frontier held stories of renegade warriors who preyed on vulnerable travelers. "Mama!" Mary sensed her mother's tension and moved closer. "Stay right here," Eleanor instructed quietly, setting Tommy down between the children. Her hand found the small knife in her coat pocket, hardly adequate for defense, but better than nothing. The scout, she could see him more clearly now, made no threatening gesture. Instead, he raised one hand in what appeared to be greeting rather than warning. When Eleanor didn't respond, he called out in heavily accented English, "Trail ahead, washed out." 2 miles, relief and confusion warred within her. This was useful information, even if its source remained questionable. "How do you know?" she asked, maintaining her distance. "Tried it yesterday," he responded. "Bridge collapsed. Have to cross. At Falls, instead." The Falls. Eleanor knew enough of the territory to understand he referenced Crystal Falls, where the rush of water created a treacherous crossing even in summer. In winter, with ice and heavy flow, attempting it with children would be near suicide. "There must be another way," she protested, desperation creeping into her voice. The scout stepped closer, and she could now distinguish his features clearly. Younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with keen eyes that assessed rather than threatened. His clothing showed the wear of extended travel, but his bearing remained proud despite obvious hardship. "I know another path," he offered. "Longer, but safer. Can reach Pine Ridge before dark." Eleanor weighed the offer against her circumstances. Trust a stranger in unfamiliar territory or attempt to find their own way through deteriorating conditions. The choice felt impossible, yet she could see no alternative. "Why help us?" She asked directly. He was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. Then, "I am Jonas Walker, scout for cavalry until yesterday, discharged at Fort Laramie." His voice carried no bitterness, only statement of fact. "Saw you in Copperfield, knew they would send you away." "How?" "Those with power always cast out those without," he said simply. "Same story everywhere." The philosophical observation rang too true to dismiss. Eleanor made her decision. "Show us this safer path." Jonas nodded and started forward, setting a pace that accounted for the children's capabilities. Eleanor noticed he kept them to the less exposed side of the trail, his body partially blocking the worst of the wind. For the next 2 hours, they traveled in relative silence, save for occasional directions from Jonas and the children's questions. Tommy, now walking again to share the burden, fascinated by their unusual guide. "Are you a real Indian?" the boy asked with childhood's unvarnished curiosity. "Tommy!" Eleanor scolded, embarrassed, but Jonas seemed unbothered. "Apache," he confirmed. "Mother's people. Father was soldier." He pointed to the sky despite the heavy clouds. "Somewhere between earth and clouds, that's where two blood people belong." Mary considered this thoughtfully. "Papa said we're all from somewhere else originally, even people who act like they always belonged." The insight pleased Jonas, and the corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but closer than Eleanor had yet seen. "Your father was wise." As they walked, the landscape gradually changed. The trail wound through stands of ancient pine that provided occasional shelter from the wind. Jonas led them through narrow passages that a lone traveler might miss. Shortcuts that saved both time and energy. During one rest stop beneath a rock overhang, Eleanor distributed the last of their biscuits. She hesitated before offering one to Jonas, uncertain of frontier etiquette regarding such matters. He accepted the gesture, with a single nod, eating with the careful conservation of someone accustomed to uncertain meals. When Tommy struggled with his portion, Jonas produced a small knife, different from any Eleanor had seen before, with intricate patterns carved into the handle. "Apache hunter's knife," Jonas explained when he noticed her attention. "My grandfather's grandfather made it. He cut Tommy's biscuit into manageable pieces, the blade's sharpness testament to constant care." The simple act of assisting her son struck Eleanor with unexpected force. Here was a stranger, a man her town would have viewed with suspicion or outright hostility, showing more practical kindness than many who had known her for years. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the help with the biscuit. Jonas glanced up, their eyes meeting briefly. In that moment, Eleanor saw not the stoic scout or the discharged cavalryman, but simply a person navigating his own difficult journey. The rest period ended too soon. The light continued to fade, and Jonas's expression grew increasingly concerned as he scanned the darkening sky. "Storm is worse than expected," he warned. "Must reach shelter soon." They pressed onward with renewed urgency. The wind, which had been merely uncomfortable, now drove the snow nearly horizontal. Visibility reduced to arm's length, forcing them to move closer together to avoid separation. Eleanor's strength began to flag. The combined weight of their supplies and the constant effort to shield her children from the wind took its toll. Her feet, inadequately protected by her worn boots, grew numb. Each step required conscious effort. During one especially fierce gust, Eleanor stumbled. Before she could fall, Jonas's hand gripped her arm, steadying her. The contact sparked brief warmth through layers of clothing, human touch in an inhuman landscape. "Not much further," he assured her, though Eleanor wondered if he said it to encourage rather than inform. The children, for their part, showed remarkable resilience. Mary had taken charge of Tommy, matching her stride to his and offering constant encouragement. Their fortitude reminded Eleanor why she fought so hard to secure their future. As full darkness approached, Jonas halted suddenly. Through the swirling snow, Eleanor could just distinguish lights, flickering, distant, but unmistakably human-made. "Pine Ridge Crossing," Jonas announced. Relief flooded through Eleanor with such intensity that her knees briefly weakened. They had made it. Against her doubts and fears, against the mounting storm, they had reached their destination. But as they drew closer, details became apparent that dampened her initial joy. The lights came from structures more primitive than she'd imagined. Not proper buildings, but a collection of rough cabins and what appeared to be a large trading post constructed of logs and salvaged materials. The settlement clung to the ridge, like a barnacle, clearly built for function rather than comfort. Smoke from multiple chimneys promised warmth, but the overall appearance suggested a place of last resort rather than opportunity. "Is this really the town?" Mary asked, disappointment evident in her young voice. Eleanor sought words that would maintain hope without creating false expectations. Before she could respond, Jonas spoke instead. "Has what you need," he said. "Warmth, food, people who choose survival over comfort." He paused, then added, "People like you now." The assessment, neither kind nor cruel but simply honest, helped Eleanor recalibrate her perspective. She hadn't fled Copperfield seeking luxury or society. She'd escaped in search of a chance to survive, to build anew from whatever materials presented themselves. As they approached the heart of the settlement, a figure emerged from the largest structure, the trading post Jonas had mentioned. A stout man with a full beard and leather apron squinted into the storm. "Travelers," he called. "What brings you to Pine Ridge in such weather?" "Bill Harris sent us," Eleanor responded, raising her voice against the wind. "Said Caleb Wilson might know of work or shelter." The man's expression shifted from wariness to interest. "Harris, eh? That old fool wouldn't send family folk here unless they had nowhere else to turn." He gestured them closer. "I'm Wilson, And you're half frozen, I'd wager. Come inside where we can talk proper. Jonas made as if to withdraw, his duty apparently complete. But Wilson called after him. You too, Scout. Storm like this. No one travels further tonight. They entered the trading post, a cavernous space that smelled of animal pelts, tobacco, and something cooking on a cast-iron stove. The warmth struck them like a physical force, causing immediate shivers as their bodies adjusted. "Bess," Wilson called. "Got company needing hot food and dry places to sit." A woman emerged from the back room, her face round and weathered but kind. She took one look at the children and moved into immediate action, producing blankets and guiding them toward the stove. "Lord's mercy," she exclaimed, "these babies are near ice themselves." As Eleanor's children thawed in Mrs. Wilson's capable hands, the trader turned his attention to Eleanor herself. "Now then, Mrs. Parker," Eleanor supplied. "Eleanor Parker." "These are my children, Mary and Tommy. Parker." Wilson scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Harris mentioned a widow recently made. Copperfield's harsh way of handling winter housing, I hear." The description stung with its accuracy, but Eleanor forced herself to focus on the present rather than dwell on injustice. "We're seeking any opportunity, work, shelter, a fresh start." Wilson nodded slowly, assessing not just Eleanor but the children too. Hardy stock to travel in weather like this. But Pine Ridge isn't like the towns back east, nor even like Copperfield. We make our own rules here. Survival first, social niceties second. He glanced at Jonas, who had taken a position near the door, neither inside nor outside. "Including accepting help wherever it comes from. You scout around these parts?" "Used to," Jonas answered. "Discharged from Fort Laramie." Fort Laramie. Wilson's interest sharpened. "Know those trails well then, and the passes that'll close soon. Might need a man with that knowledge." Eleanor sensed an opportunity forming, but hesitated to presume anything about Jonas's intentions. They had reached Pine Ridge. His obligation, if it had ever existed, was fulfilled. As if reading her thoughts, Jonas spoke. "I go where the trail leads. Storm closes many paths." "Ain't that the truth?" Wilson agreed. "Tell you what, the loft above the post needs constant tending. Merchandise shifts with every storm. I pay in credit, some coin, and meals. Your strong back and wilderness knowledge might serve us all well." Jonas's only response was a slight tilt of his head. Acknowledgement rather than commitment, but not refusal either. Bess Wilson bustled forward with steaming cups of something that smelled of herbs and honey. As Eleanor sipped the warm liquid, feeling life return to her limbs, she observed her surroundings more carefully. The trading post held more than goods. It clearly served as the settlement's heart. Maps covered one wall, showing trails, claims, and danger zones known only to those who lived beyond civilization's edges. Photographs and sketches depicted familiar faces, residents, presumably, captured in moments of survival and triumph. "We've got a cabin about a quarter-mile up the ridge," Wilson continued, addressing Eleanor. "Previous tenant left sudden when gold rumors proved false. Needs work, but it's sturdy. You'd be welcome to use it while you figure your next moves." The offer, so casually stated, represented more hope than Eleanor had dared imagine. "I can pay." "Some?" she began. Wilson waved away her concern. "Credit first, accounts later. We've found that people who survive the journey here usually prove worth the investment. Besides," he smiled at the children, "a settlement needs young blood to stay alive itself." As arrangements continued around her, Eleanor found herself watching Jonas. Their guide, their savior, she admitted privately, had completed his self-appointed task. Yet he lingered, accepting Wilson's offer of work with the same quiet pragmatism he'd shown throughout their journey. Later, as darkness fully claimed the settlement and arrangements were finalized, Eleanor finally approached him. He was checking his horse at the lean-to that served as a stable. "I want to thank you properly," she began. "I know we survived because of you." Jonas looked at her directly for the second time that day. You would have found your way. Strong spirit guides strongest when path seems lost. Perhaps, Eleanor conceded, but you were our path today, our bridge across the impossible. A ghost of something, perhaps memory, perhaps recognition, passed across his features. Bridges can be built by anyone willing to cross dark waters. The profound statement hung between them as snow continued to fall. Eleanor sensed deeper meaning beneath the words, but lacked the knowledge to fully interpret it. Will you... She hesitated, uncertain what she was asking. Will you be staying in Pine Ridge? For now, he answered. Storm closes many trails, opens others. With that cryptic response, he returned to tending his horse, and Eleanor retreated to the cabin Wilson had provided, her children's safety secured for at least one more night. As she tucked them into blankets, salvaged by Bess Wilson from the trading post stores, Eleanor reflected on the day's extraordinary events. They had left Copperfield as outcasts, found hope on a stalled train, and survived a winter storm with the help of a stranger who seemed to materialize from necessity itself. Pine Ridge Crossing was not the settlement she'd imagined, but it offered something more precious than comfort. It offered the chance to begin again. And Jonas Walker, the solitary Apache scout, had transformed from possibility to reality, his presence now woven into their new beginning in ways she couldn't yet fathom. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, learning the rhythms of this frontier. Settlement, finding her place in its precarious social structure, understanding what role Jonas might play in their continued survival. But for tonight, as the storm raged beyond the cabin walls, Eleanor Parker allowed herself to believe that running into the unknown had led not to catastrophe, but to unexpected salvation. The first step of their new life had been taken. The trail ahead remained uncertain, but at least they were no longer alone in facing whatever winter might yet demand. Morning broke with a stillness that belied the previous night's fury. Eleanor woke to unfamiliar sounds, pine branches sighing, under fresh snow, distant voices calling greetings, the rhythmic thud of firewood being split. Most notably, she woke without the crushing anxiety that had accompanied each dawn in Copperfield's final weeks. The cabin, though crude, offered solid protection. Chinks between logs had been properly sealed with moss and clay. The floor, while rough, didn't shift or complain beneath her weight. Someone had left a stack of split wood by the door, along with basic provisions: flour, beans, salt, and coffee. Mary stirred first, as was her habit. The girl's eyes scanned the room, cataloguing changes since the night's exhausted collapse into sleep. We made it, didn't we, Mama? To the place in the story. Eleanor smiled at her daughter's perception. They had indeed travelled beyond the maps. Edge entered a narrative where survival demanded new rules and alliances. We did, sweetheart, though the story's just beginning. Tommy woke with a start, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar environment. His small face crumpled with the potential for tears until he spotted something that thoroughly distracted him. Look! He pointed to the window, where frost had created elaborate patterns on the glass, crystals that caught morning light and scattered it into prismatic fragments. Through these icy decorations, Eleanor could observe Pine Ridge's morning routine. Women hauled water from a central well, moving with practiced efficiency despite the cold. Men checked traps and snares set along the ridgeline. Children too young for adult duties played in the snow, their laughter carrying clearly on the crisp. Ere a knock interrupted their observations. Bess Wilson entered, carrying a covered pot that filled the cabin with the aroma of fresh porridge. "Thought you might appreciate hot breakfast," she offered, setting the pot on their small table. "Settling into a new place works better on a full stomach." Eleanor accepted gratefully. The kindness here differed from Copperfield's calculated assistance. No underlying expectations or unspoken conditions. People helped because isolation demanded it. "Mr. Wilson mentioned work this morning," Eleanor said as they ate. "I'm ready to contribute however I can." "Caleb's talking to folk now," Bess explained. "See who needs extra hands. We're not fancy, but we pull together." She studied the children with grandmother's eyes. "Might need someone to teach the young ones letters and numbers come spring. Most families homestead 3-4 days ride. Out, only make it to town once a season. Teaching." Eleanor hadn't dared hope her skills might find use so quickly. "I taught a school in Copperfield," she admitted. "Small, but all ages." "That would suit," Bess nodded approvingly. "Meanwhile, Trading Post can use sorting help. Inventory's chaos since the last supply train. Credit for goods. Keeps you independent. While finding your footing." After breakfast, Eleanor dressed the children in their warmest clothes. Outside, the settlement revealed itself more clearly in daylight. Pine Ridge Crossing sat at the convergence of 3 ancient game trails, now used for trading routes. 20 structures comprised the town. The prominent trading post, a blacksmith shop, a communal kitchen doubling as gathering place, and scattered cabins at various stages of completion or disrepair. Jonas Walker emerged from a modest cabin near the trading post just as they passed. He'd traded yesterday's trail-worn buckskins for clothes more suited to settlement work. Heavy canvas pants, a flannel shirt, leather vest. Yet something indefinable marked him as permanently apart from the others, a solitude that clothes couldn't disguise. "Morning," he offered, his voice carrying easily in the clear air. "Good morning," Eleanor replied. "Mr. Wilson mentioned you'd be working at the trading post as well." Jonas nodded. "He needs winter camp supplies organized. Northern Passage closes soon, last chance for many families to stock up." His gaze shifted to the children. "First night in new place. Sleep well?" Tommy answered first. "The frost made pictures on our window. Mary says they tell stories." "Your sister is wise," Jonas acknowledged, then addressed Mary directly. "What stories did you see?" The girl considered carefully. "Stories about finding new homes, about people who help each other when it's cold." Her insight struck both adults. With its perceptiveness, Eleanor had wondered how much the children understood of their circumstances, but Mary's observation suggested she grasped the essential truth of their situation. Inside the trading post, organized chaos reigned. Caleb Wilson directed operations from behind a massive counter, his ledgers recording trades, debts, and promises. 2 local men struggled to reshelf goods displaced by yesterday's storm, while a woman sorted mail and messages that had arrived before the passes closed. "Eleanor," Wilson called. "And the walker. Good. Isabella here needs tracking before noon. Last mail before spring thaw. Isabella Torres, a lean woman with skin weathered by wind and sun, explained the task. 43 messages needed proper filing. Winter's isolation made mail precious as medicine." Eleanor settled the children near the stove with paper and pencils Bess provided. Her years of classroom management proved invaluable as she organized. The mail by destination, handling, and urgency. Jonas worked across the room, methodically cataloging supplies. His movements showed military precision. Each item checked, counted, recorded without wasted motion. Occasionally, his eyes met Eleanor's across the space, acknowledging without words the shared understanding of people rebuilding lives. By midday, they'd made significant progress. Wilson called a break, producing thick sandwiches and hot coffee. "You work harder than some who've been here years," he commented to Eleanor. "Both of you," he added, including Jonas. "Work keeps worry at bay," Eleanor responded, a philosophy forged during her darkest days. The afternoon brought visitors to the trading post, residents collecting supplies, placing orders for spring, sharing news. Each interaction taught Eleanor about Pine Ridge's complex social fabric. Marcus Green, the blacksmith, needed assistance with correspondence. He was educated, but his hands, scarred from years at the forge, struggled with delicate work. Eleanor's offered help was accepted with grateful dignity. The Larson family arrived with 3 children, seeking winter provisions. Their homestead lay 2 days' ride north. When they discovered Eleanor had teaching experience, animated discussion followed about possible lessons for their eldest daughter, who showed exceptional aptitude for reading. Throughout these interactions, Jonas maintained his position on the settlement's periphery. He contributed essential skills, identifying medicinal plants, suggesting efficient storage methods, solving logistical problems with quiet authority. Yet social boundaries persisted. His mixed heritage and solitary nature marked him as perpetually other, even among people who depended on his knowledge. Eleanor observed how residents accepted his help while maintaining emotional distance. Only Caleb Wilson and his wife seemed to engage with Jonas as an equal, though even they respected his preference for minimal conversation. During their afternoon break, Bess invited Eleanor to the kitchen for tea. The building served multiple purposes: restaurant, meeting hall, winter refuge for those whose cabins needed repairs. "Had you noticed how we treat Jonas?" Bess said without preamble. She poured strong tea, adding honey from her precious winter stores. Eleanor hadn't realized her observations were so obvious. "I've wondered about the dynamics here. Jonas is respected but separate," Bess explained. "Not by choice, ours or his. Frontier life makes folk wary of outsiders initially. Add in his heritage, his cavalry past, his solitary nature." She stirred her tea thoughtfully. "People here value survival skills above social comfort, but change takes time." They watched through the window as Jonas helped the Larson children practice knot tying, a practical skill that delighted them. His patient instruction contrasted sharply with the cautious distance maintained by their parents. "He saved us," Eleanor said quietly, "guided us here through the storm. Without him, you might have frozen to death," Bess finished bluntly. "That matters. Actions matter here more than anything else." She leaned forward. "Give it time. Trust builds slowly, especially for those who've been disappointed." The afternoon progressed with mounting accomplishment. Eleanor finished the mail sorting and began creating a simple inventory system for the trading post. Jonas completed his cataloging and started reinforcing shelving weakened by constant use. Their efficiency impressed Wilson, who made promises of continued work. "Spring brings new challenges. Animals wake hungry, supplies run low, tempers get short. Need steady hands to manage it all." As the day ended, Eleanor prepared to return to their cabin. Jonas approached as they bundled the children for the cold walk home. "Storm clearing," he observed. "Tomorrow will be colder but bright." Eleanor nodded, sensing he had more to say. His hesitation was subtle but noticeable. "You work well," he added. "Children too. Adaptable." The compliment, sparse but genuine, warmed her more than the heavy cloak. "We're learning. Thanks to your help yesterday." Jonas's expression shifted, something complicated passing across his features. "Yesterday needed doing. Tomorrow has its own requirements." As they parted, Eleanor recognized the careful language of someone maintaining protective distance. Yet something had shifted in the air between them, an acknowledgement that their lives now followed intersecting paths. That evening, as she tucked the children into bed, Mary asked, "Mama, are we going to stay here forever?" "I don't know about forever," Eleanor answered honestly, "but for now Pine Ridge feels like where we need to be." Tommy, already drowsy, murmured, "I like Mr. Jonas. He knows about animals and knots and finding directions." "He's a good man to have as a friend," Eleanor agreed, surprised by how naturally the word friend emerged. In Copperfield, relationships had been defined by social position and obligation. Here, in this frontier settlement, friendship seemed measured by different standards. Outside, wind carried the clear notes of someone playing harmonica, a sad, beautiful tune that spoke of distances traveled and distances still ahead. Eleanor wondered if Jonas, in his solitary cabin, heard the same melody and what memories it might stir. Pine Ridge Crossing was indeed a place of stories, some ending, some beginning, all intertwined by the simple necessity of winter survival. As Eleanor drifted towards sleep, she recognized they had truly crossed a threshold, not just geographically, but into a life where resilience mattered more than reputation, where actions spoke louder than social standing. The real question wasn't whether they could survive here. It was what kind of people they would become in the process, and whether the solitary Apache scout, who had already proven himself a bridge across impossible distances, might find his own place in their emerging story. Tomorrow would continue, writing that answer one small choice at a time. 3 weeks transformed Pine Ridge from a temporary refuge into something resembling home. Eleanor's efficiency at the trading post earned her a steady wage, while her evening reading lessons for the settlement's children created unexpected community bonds. The Wilsons had been right. People here valued contribution over conformity. Tommy's off returned with a vengeance on a particularly brutal morning in early January. The dry air and sudden temperature shifts proved treacherous for his delicate lungs. Eleanor recognized the warning signs too well, the rasping wheeze, the flush of fever, the lethargy replacing his usual boundless energy. Mrs. Parker, Bess. Wilson found her at the trading post, concern evident, heard the little one struggling. Storm coming might make it worse. "I'm managing," Eleanor began automatically, then caught the older woman's knowing expression. "Though I admit, his medicines from Copperfield are nearly gone." "Jonas might help," Bess suggested carefully. "Apache remedies work when regular medicine can't." Eleanor hesitated. Asking for help meant acknowledging dependence, something her independence-forged spirit resisted. Yet watching Tommy struggle for breath that morning had stripped away such prideful concerns. She found Jonas at the stable, checking his horse's hooves for ice damage. He looked up as she approached, immediately noting her distracted manner. "What's wrong?" Direct, no social pleasantries. She'd learned this was Jonas's way. "It's Tommy. His breathing. Fever's starting. I hate to ask, but Bess mentioned Apache. Medicines," he finished. "You have willow bark tea?" "Some. Need more, and other herbs." He straightened from his task. "I can gather them if weather holds." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you. Don't thank yet," he interrupted. "First, let me see him." At the cabin, Jonas examined Tommy with careful hands. His touch remained professional, clinical, yet somehow gentler than any doctor Eleanor had encountered. He spoke soothingly in what she assumed was Apache while assessing the boy's condition. "Chest congestion," he diagnosed. "Starting to build fluid. Needs treatment now." "What do you need to gather?" Eleanor asked, already reaching for his coat. "Several things. Difficult in winter." He hesitated, then added, "I'll need help identifying some. My mother taught me healing ways, but these mountains—" He gestured helplessly. "Different plants, different strengths." Eleanor made an immediate decision. "Mary can watch Tommy. I'll come with you." The storm Bess had mentioned lurked. On the horizon as they set out, Jonas led her along a narrow trail that wound through dense pine forest. His pace challenged her endurance, but Eleanor refused to slow them down when Tommy's health hung in the balance. Here, Jonas stopped at a small clearing. "Need to find Devil's Club. Has thorns. Grows where water seeps underground." Working together, they searched along the clearing's edge. Their shared purpose dissolved the careful social distance they usually maintained. When Eleanor slipped on ice-covered rocks, Jonas caught her arm without hesitation. When brambles threatened his face, she pushed them aside. The plant they sought proved elusive. Frustration mounted as time passed without success. "Wait," Eleanor said suddenly. "Is that it?" She pointed to a thorny shrub growing near a frozen stream. Jonas examined her find. "Yes, but we need roots, not stems. Still frozen. Must dig carefully. Together." They worked to excavate the frozen plant. Eleanor's teacher hands grew raw from cold and soil, while Jonas's knife work revealed precise knowledge of plant anatomy. Their breath mingled in the cold air as they bent close to the task. "My mother would approve," Jonas commented unexpectedly. Apache women first taught men about healing, sacred knowledge shared when trust earns it. "I feel honored," Eleanor responded sincerely. They continued foraging for other needed herbs, pine needles for tea, a specific fungus growing on dead trees, mineral-rich soil that Jonas explained would draw out fever. With each discovery, their conversation deepened. "You miss cavalry life?" Eleanor asked as they worked. "Complicated," Jonas replied. "Served well but always watched differently. Good scout but never quite soldier." He paused. "You miss teaching proper classroom?" "Sometimes. Structure had comfort. But this," she gestured at their surroundings. "This feels more honest somehow." By the time they returned to Pine Ridge, afternoon shadows had lengthened dramatically. Tommy's condition had worsened despite Mary's vigilant care. His breathing, more labored, fever climbing. Jonas worked with focused intensity, grinding herbs into paste, brewing specific teas, creating poultices. Eleanor watched, learning methods that might prove essential for future crises. "Pine pitch on chest," he instructed. "Breathe steam from this bowl. Give tea every 2 hours." Through the night, they maintained the regimen. Eleanor dozed fitfully while Jonas kept watch, monitoring Tommy's progress with Apache healing wisdom. Passed through generations. Near dawn, the fever broke. Tommy opened his eyes, recognition returning to his gaze. Eleanor nearly collapsed with relief, tears she'd suppressed through the long night finally flowing freely. "Thank you," she managed. Genuine gratitude overwhelming earlier reservations about dependence. "Thank you for saving him." Jonas nodded once. "Children are future, worth any effort." In the growing light, Eleanor saw exhaustion in his features, not just from the sleepless night, but something deeper. Before she could question it, he stood to leave. "Wait," she called softly. "Please stay for breakfast. It's little enough, thanks." He hesitated at the door, clearly torn between withdrawal and acceptance. Finally, he nodded once more. Preparing breakfast proved challenging with limited provisions, but Eleanor managed hotcakes from their dwindling flour supply. They ate in companionable silence, both too tired for conversation, yet comfortable in shared fatigue. Mary woke first, observing the scene with 6-year-old wisdom. "Mr. Jonas stayed all night to help Tommy." "He did," Eleanor confirmed. "Papa would have liked him." Mary stated with certainty that pierced both adults. Jonas glanced at Eleanor, the first real acknowledgement of her widowhood between them. "Your father was brave man," he told Mary. "To love so much he made family, even knowing frontier's dangers." The profound observation hung in the morning air. Eleanor recognized truth in his words, the courage required to love deeply in a place that could take everything away without warning. "I should go," Jonas said, rising stiffly. "More storm coming. Need to prepare." At the door, something made Eldino reach out, her hand briefly touching his arm. "Jonas, thank you for everything, not just the medicine." He looked at her directly, and for a moment his carefully maintained reserve faltered. "Winter makes allies of strangers," he said simply. "Sometimes more." After he left, Eleanor pondered his words. The settlement had indeed created unexpected alliances, with the Wilsons through shared work, with other families through lessons and help. But Jonas, Something different had formed there, something harder to define. Days blended as winter settled deeper. Tommy recovered fully, stronger for the ordeal. Eleanor's confidence grew with each challenge successfully met. Pine ridges, rhythm became familiar. Morning water hauling, trading post-work, evening lessons, community meals when provisions allowed. Jonas remained peripherally present, his cabin visible from her window, his knowledge invaluable during crisis. They developed efficient patterns, nods of greeting, practical conversations about supplies or weather, unspoken understanding when children needed mending or medicines required gathering. One particularly brutal night, Eleanor woke to pounding on her door. Outside, the Hendersons, a young couple from a homestead 20 miles out, had arrived near frozen, their wagon having broken down miles from help. Needed shelter, Mr. Henderson managed through chattering teeth. Baby coming too soon. Eleanor immediately set about warming them, sending Mary to wake the Wilsons. As she worked, she noticed a light appear at Jonas's cabin. Without discussion or invitation, he arrived with medical supplies and practical assistance. Together, they helped Mrs. Henderson through a difficult premature delivery. Jonas's healing knowledge proved essential. Herbs to slow contractions, techniques to position the mother safely. Eleanor provided comfort and support, drawing on every skill her mother had taught her. Dawn brought a healthy baby boy, incredibly small, but fighting strongly. As they cleaned and rested, Eleanor caught Jonas's eye across the cabin. In his weary gaze, she saw acknowledgement, not just of shared accomplishment, but of deepening trust. "We make good partners," she said simply. "Yes," he agreed. "Good partners." The Hendersons named their son Thomas for Eleanor's lost husband and their gratitude for survival. The naming struck both Eleanor and Jonas with its significance, how the past and present intertwined, how losses could transform into blessings through unexpected channels. As the settlement celebrated the new life with precious saved whiskey and shared stories, Eleanor observed how Jonas remained on the celebration's edge, respected, valued, yet still apart. Their shared experiences hadn't changed his position in the community's structure, but they had changed something between them. What began as a desperate rescue during a storm had evolved into something more nuanced, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared trials, and recognition of each other's capabilities. "Mama," Mary asked that night, observing Jonas leave, the celebration early. "Why don't people invite Mr. Jonas to stay longer?" Eleanor struggled with the answer. How to explain to a child the complex prejudices and boundaries that governed frontier society, that people could rely on someone without fully accepting them, that Jonas himself seemed to prefer the space where he operated? "Some people need more room to breathe," she said finally. "It doesn't mean they aren't friends." Mary considered this. "He looks at you different from other people." "Different how? Like he sees something important." Eleanor's heart flickered with something she quickly suppressed. Children noticed details adults often missed, but reading adult emotions was treacherous territory. "Mr. Jonas sees everyone clearly," she deflected. "It's what made him a good scout." But alone later, Eleanor admitted to herself that Mary wasn't entirely wrong. Something had shifted in Jonas's demeanor during their time foraging for Tommy's medicine during the long night of the Hendersons' crisis. The careful professional distance had developed cracks through which something more human sometimes emerged. And if she were honest, brutally honest with herself, she too had begun seeing Jonas as more than just a capable helper or occasional ally. The man who had guided them through the blizzard, who fought for Tommy's health, who delivered new life in desperate circumstances, possessed qualities that transcended simple gratitude, but such thoughts led to dangerous territory. The frontier had already taught her how quickly circumstances could change, how love could be erased by a single careless moment. Better to maintain safe distances, preserve the efficient working relationship that served them both well. Yet, as she drifted towards sleep, Eleanor couldn't help wondering if Jonas spent similar nights wrestling with similar thoughts. If the careful boundaries they maintained served as mutual protection, or merely delay against something inevitable building between them. Tomorrow would bring its own demands. The storm showed no signs of breaking, and winter's grip on Wyoming seemed determined to test every relationship, every alliance, every carefully constructed wall against emotion. For now, Eleanor chose to focus on practical concerns, keeping her children safe, maintaining their newfound stability, proving their worth to Pine Ridge Crossing. The rest would need to wait for spring, when melting ice might reveal what winter had frozen beneath its surface. February arrived with a false promise of spring. 3 consecutive days of mild temperatures created a deceptive calm, followed by a temperature plunge that transformed melted snow into treacherous sheets of ice. The settlement, initially pleased by winter's apparent retreat, found itself facing new dangers as residents struggled to maintain footing on crystalline surfaces. Eleanor's morning journey to the trading post nearly ended in disaster when she hit a patch of ice outside their cabin. Only her desperate grab for a fence post prevented a potentially serious fall. As she steadied herself, she noticed Jonas emerging from his place, moving with the sure-footed grace of someone familiar with such conditions. Dangerous, he observed, approaching to check on her. Should use sand on paths. I'll remember that, Eleanor responded, still catching her breath. Jonas studied the ground around her cabin. Without asking permission, he began spreading ash from her dead fire on the worst patches of ice. His presumption might have offended her weeks ago. Now it felt like natural assistance between neighbors. Let me help, she offered, but he'd already completed the task. Our children will be out soon, he explained. Little ones fall hard. The simple concern touched her. Jonas thought of her children's safety as automatically as his own. This growing familiarity represented both comfort and confusion. Their relationship, evolving beyond clearly defined boundaries. At the trading post, Caleb Wilson welcomed them with unusual excitement. Just heard from the Mackenzie party. Found fresh gold traces up Willow Creek. Not enough for a rush, but enough to bring prospectors next month. The news created immediate bustle. Gold meant increased trade, higher prices, new faces, and inevitable problems when experienced miners met greenhorn fortune seekers. Wilson launched into immediate preparations, inventorying supplies that would be most in demand. Eleanor, we'll need better organization, he said. Prospector money's good, but their habits aren't. Need systems that keep order when whiskey flows. Jonas worked methodically sorting mining equipment, while Eleanor designed a ledger system that could handle rapid transactions. They're efficient. Partnership didn't go unnoticed by other residents. Samuel Briggs, a miner who'd arrived just before Christmas, observed them with growing interest. You two work well together, Briggs commented during a break, almost married-like. Eleanor felt her cheeks flush, while Jonas's expression shuttered completely. The observation struck at precisely the tension they both carefully avoided addressing. Mrs. Parker possesses excellent organizational skills, Jonas responded neutrally. That she does, Briggs agreed, then pushed further. Heard you saved her and the children from freezing out on the trail. That's the kind of act that builds lasting bonds. Eleanor rescued the conversation before it could worsen. Mr. Briggs, did you need something specific today, or are you here to socialize? The miner laughed good-naturedly, but took the hint. Just need pick handles. Storm cost me 2 good ones. After he left, Eleanor glanced at Jonas, who had returned to his work with extra focus. The discomfort his comments created lingered in the air between them. People talk, she said quietly. In small places, they always do. Talk means nothing, Jonas replied without looking up. Actions matter. True enough, but the distinction felt increasingly difficult to maintain. Their actions, the countless small kindnesses, shared crises, efficient cooperation, painted a picture that others interpreted through their own lenses. Later that morning, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor. Margaret Walsh, a widow who'd arrived in Pine Ridge 6 months earlier, knocked at the cabin door. Her husband had been killed in a mining accident, leaving her with 2 teenage sons who now worked various jobs to support their family. "Mrs. Parker, I hope you don't mind the intrusion." "Not at all. Please come in." Margaret entered hesitantly, her eyes studying the cabin's modest interior. "I won't stay long. Just wanted to offer advice, perhaps." Eleanor served tea, curious about this unexpected visit from someone she'd barely spoken to beyond trading polite greetings. "You're newer to widowhood than I," Margaret began. "The first winter alone is hardest, but there are decisions that need careful consideration." "Such as?" "Alliances," Margaret said delicately. "The frontier has different rules than cities, but some foundations remain the same." Eleanor felt defensive rising. "If you're referring to Mr. Walker—" "I'm referring to nothing specific," Margaret interrupted gently. "Just speaking from experience. Survival here often requires partnerships that society elsewhere might question, but the children—" She looked toward where Mary and Tommy played. "They need stability above all." The warning, diplomatically phrased, struck Eleanor with complex emotions. Part of her bristled at the implied judgment. Another part recognized the genuine concern behind the words. "Jonas saved our lives," Eleanor stated firmly. "His help continues to be invaluable. I won't let gossip dictate our choices." Margaret's expression softened. "Good, because those children deserve everything you're building here. Just be careful. Winter isolation can create feelings that spring reality might complicate." After Margaret left, Eleanor sat in troubled thought. Were her feelings toward Jonas merely products of proximity and shared survival, or had something genuine developed beneath the practical necessity of their relationship? The question gained urgency that afternoon when crisis struck the settlement. A messenger arrived from the Thompson homestead, reporting that their patriarch had suffered a severe axe injury while splitting wood. Blood loss was critical, and the isolation of their property made getting him to town impossible. "Need someone to go," Wilson announced at the trading post. "Doctor won't risk the ice, but maybe—" He glanced at Jonas. "I'll go," Jonas responded immediately, already reaching for his medical supplies. "And I'll come," Eleanor added without hesitation. Jonas turned to her, surprise evident. "Not necessary. Children need—" "The Wilsons can watch them for a day. 2 people can handle a severe wound better than 1. Their eyes met in a moment of unspoken communication. Eleanor saw his instinctive protectiveness, his desire to shield her from potential danger. But she also saw his acknowledgement of her. "Determination and capability both go," Wilson decided. "Take my fastest horse, should make it before dark if you push." The journey tested both their resources and resolve. Twin riding on Jonas's powerful mount, they covered ground with desperate speed. The ice sheets that threatened settlement paths proved even more treacherous on open trails, forcing careful navigation through frozen streams and slippery ridges. As they rode, pressed together for warmth and efficiency, Eleanor couldn't help but notice the solid strength of Jonas's form, the way his arms encircled her protectively when the horse stumbled, the shared rhythm of their bodies moving in sync with the animal's gait. "You ride well," he commented during a brief rest. "My father insisted I learn, said frontier women needed every skill possible. Your father was wise about many things." The personal observation marked another small breach in their careful formalities. Eleanor found herself wondering how many such small breaches would accumulate before their relationship transformed beyond recognition. They reached the Thompson homestead as twilight painted the snow in shades of blue and silver. Inside, they found devastation. The family patriarch, strong as ancient oak, lay grey-faced from blood loss. His wife and grown sons had attempted basic first aid, but lacked experience for injuries this severe. Jonas assessed the situation with military precision. Artery nicked. Must close quickly or... He didn't finish the grim prognosis. Working together, with practiced efficiency, they cleaned the wound, applied pressure and prepared materials for closure. Eleanor assisted with steady hands, despite the blood and distress surrounding them. Jonas's Apache healing methods, combined with her basic medical knowledge from teaching emergencies, proved effective. As Jonas began the delicate work of sealing the artery with heated metal, a primitive but sometimes necessary technique, he glanced at Eleanor. "Ready?" "Ready." The procedure proved gruesome. Mr. Thompson's screams echoed through the cabin while family members held him down. Eleanor maintained pressure on surrounding vessels, while Jonas worked with concentration so intense it seemed to create a bubble of calm around them. When finally complete, they collapsed side by side against the cabin wall, both exhausted and blood-spattered from their efforts. The family bustled around, creating bandages and preparing the patient for recovery, leaving Eleanor and Jonas alone for the first time since arriving. "You didn't flinch," Jonas observed quietly. "I've seen death," Eleanor replied, equally quiet. "Prefer fighting against it when possible." A profound look passed between them, recognition of shared values that transcended cultural boundaries or social expectations. In that moment, Eleanor understood that whatever connection existed between them had been forged by more than circumstance or necessity. Mrs. Thompson insisted they stay the night, properly assess the patient's progress before attempting the dangerous return journey. They accepted gratefully, eating the first hot meal either had consumed all day. After cleaning up and checking their patient's stability, they found themselves alone by the hearth, while the family retreated to give them space. "Eleanor," Jonas spoke her name directly for the first time. The informality struck them both with its intimacy. "Yes." What Margaret Walsh said today, she meant well, but doesn't understand. Eleanor tensed. What doesn't she understand? He looked at her directly, dark eyes holding truths she wasn't sure she was ready to hear, that some connections form despite all attempts to prevent them, that survival can create bonds stronger than society's rules. Her heart accelerated. "Jonas, we've maintained proper distance, have we?" he challenged gently. "Or have we pretended while our lives became intertwined?" The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Eleanor recognized the turning point they faced, acknowledge what was building between them, or continue the careful dance of denial. "Children need stability," she said finally. "I can't risk—" "I understand risk," he interrupted. "Spent my life balanced between worlds, Apache and American, civilian and soldier. Always measuring safety against authenticity." He paused, then added, "But sometimes the greater risk is in denying truth." Eleanor looked at their hands, both stained with Mr. Thompson's blood from their shared efforts to save a life. How many more crises would they face together? How long could they maintain artificial boundaries while their actions proved them partners in all but name? "We should rest," she deflected. "Long ride tomorrow?" Jonas nodded acceptance of the postponed conversation. As they prepared separate sleeping areas on the cabin floor, Eleanor knew they hadn't resolved anything, merely delayed the inevitable acknowledgement of what was building between them. Outside, winter's grip continued to tighten on Wyoming territory, but within the small circle of lamplight, surrounded by the tangible proof of their combined strength, Eleanor felt the ice around her heart beginning, finally, to melt. The night would pass. Tomorrow would demand its own choices. But the truth once glimpsed, could not be easily forgotten. Whatever the future held, Eleanor knew their relationship had crossed another threshold, one that would reshape everything they thought they knew about possibility in this harsh and unexpected place. Dawn broke with startling clarity at the Thompson homestead. Eleanor woke to find Jonas already checking on their patient, whose color had improved dramatically overnight. The successful surgery revealed itself anew in daylight. A potentially fatal injury transformed into a manageable wound. Through their combined skills, "He'll live," Jonas confirmed, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Thanks to your knowledge," Eleanor responded, joining him beside the patient. "Our knowledge," he corrected, catching her eye briefly before they both returned to professional assessment. The ride back to Pine Ridge Crossing tested Eleanor's exhaustion, but offered time for reflection. Pressed against Jonas's back for warmth, she felt the steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid reliability of his presence. Yesterday's unfinished conversation lingered between them like morning mist, but neither attempted to resurrect it during the journey. They reached the settlement as afternoon shadows lengthened. Mary and Tommy rushed from the Wilsons' cabin, relief and joy evident as they launched themselves at their mother. Eleanor embraced them fiercely, grateful beyond words. To return safely, Mama worked with Jonas to save someone, Tommy announced proudly to Bess Wilson. "A hero mission." Eleanor caught Jonas's quick glance. The boy's innocent words carried implications neither adult dared examine too closely. "Speaking of heroes," Wilson interrupted, approaching with unusual excitement, "got news while you were gone. Railroad. Survey team arriving next week. They're mapping the pass road that leads to our settlement." The announcement created immediate commotion. Railroad access meant prosperity for Pine Ridge, opportunities that settlers had only dreamed possible during winter's isolation. "They'll need guides," Wilson continued, "local knowledge about passes, weather patterns, dangerous routes." His meaningful look included Jonas. Someone with cavalry scouting experience would be invaluable. "Railroad work means good money," Briggs added, having overheard. "Enough to establish proper homesteads, maybe even bring more families here." Change hovered over the settlement like an approaching storm. Eleanor felt simultaneously excited and apprehensive. Railroad connections would end Pine Ridge's isolation, bring commerce and contact with wider civilization, but it would also transform the tight-knit community dynamics they'd developed. That evening, she worked late at the trading post, helping Wilson prepare for the railroad men's arrival. Jonas remained to assist with heavy inventory, their partnership continuing despite the day's emotional undercurrents. "You're quiet tonight," Wilson observed as he locked up. "Thinking about changes coming," Eleanor admitted. The older man nodded, understanding. "Change always unsettles, but this settlement survived worse than prosperity might bring." He glanced between Eleanor and Jonas, and the important things, the connections that matter, those don't break easy. After Wilson departed, Eleanor and Jonas found themselves alone in the trading post. The lamplight cast intimate shadows across the familiar space where they'd spent countless hours organizing supplies and solving problems. "The railroad work," Eleanor began hesitantly. "It could be good for you. Steady employment, respect for your skills. Could be good for all of us," Jonas responded carefully. The plural pronoun hung in the air, laden with meaning they'd both been avoiding. "Jonas," Eleanor started again, then hesitated. Speaking his name still felt charged with intimacy despite their growing familiarity. "About yesterday, what you said at the Thompsons." He moved closer, not invading her space, but reducing the distance that had become their habit. "I spoke truth," he said simply. "Winter hasn't created feelings that weren't there, only revealed what was." Eleanor's breath caught. "We can't. The children need stability. I can't risk trusting again," he finished. "Risk letting someone Close after loss. The direct challenge stirred something defensive within her. You understand loss too, don't you? Your wife, your child. Don't you fear? Fear is natural, he interrupted gently, but fear that prevents living is dangerous. My wife died, yes, our child with her. I carried that grief like stone. His eyes held hers. But stone can become foundation, not just weight. Outside, night wind rattled the trading post's windows. Eleanor thought of all the walls they'd built between themselves: propriety, cultural differences, fear of judgment, fear of pain. Yet each crisis had proven those walls more porous than protective. "What do we do?" she asked quietly, not entirely certain what she meant by the question. "We continue," Jonas answered. "Take each day, meet each challenge. Trust builds slowly like winter thaw." The metaphor resonated deeply. She wondered if they'd already crossed invisible boundaries without realizing it, if their careful distance had given way to something more genuine through shared trials and quiet understanding. A knock interrupted their private moment. Marcus Green, the blacksmith, entered with unusual agitation. "Problem brewing," he announced. "Prospectors just arrived at Briggs's claim. 3 of them, including one who claims prior rights to that land. They're drunk and loud. Pine ridges. Remoteness usually deterred troublemakers, but gold rumors attracted all types." Eleanor immediately thought of maintaining order while Wilson was away visiting his sister's family 2 ridges over. "We need to—" she began, but Jonas was already moving. "I'll handle it," he stated, checking that his knife was secure. "Not alone," Eleanor countered firmly. "We handle challenges together here." Their eyes met in brief acknowledgement before they followed Marcus into the freezing night. At Briggs's cabin, they found 3 rough-looking men staging increasingly hostile confrontation. Briggs, outnumbered and intimidated, looked relieved at their arrival. "These gentlemen claim they registered this claim in Cheyenne," he explained, nervously. "But I've worked it for 5 months now." "Worked what you stole," the largest intruder growled. He swayed slightly, whiskey courage evident. "This land's ours. Got papers to prove it." Jonas positioned himself strategically, not threatening, but clearly prepared. "Let's see papers," he suggested calmly. The man fumbled for documents that proved suspiciously crisp for mountain travelers. As Jonas examined them by lamplight, Eleanor noticed the others fingering weapons. Not enough to draw, but enough to— "Signal intent. Documents list location 2 ridges west," Jonas announced. "This is different claim." "Lying Apache," one man spat. "Probably can't read proper English." The slur hung heavy in the cold air. Eleanor felt Jonas's tension despite his controlled exterior. She stepped forward deliberately. "I read English perfectly," she stated firmly. "These are indeed for the Western claim. You've made an honest mistake in the dark." The men turned their attention to her with varying degrees of calculation. "Pretty widow woman defending the Injun?" the leader leered. "Maybe we should discuss this more privately." His implications sent rage flooding through Eleanor. Before she could respond, Jonas moved with fluid precision. One moment he stood still. The next, his knife point rested against the man's throat. "The lady spoke clear," Jonas said quietly. "You're on wrong claim. Leave now or explain to Territorial Marshal why you threatened citizens." The standoff stretched seconds that felt like hours. Finally, the leader stepped back, raising his hands mockingly. "No need for trouble, just protecting our interests." As the prospectors retreated, muttering threats and accusations, Eleanor noticed how naturally she'd aligned herself with Jonas, how their protection extended mutually without discussion or hesitation. "Thank you both," Briggs said once the men disappeared. "That could have turned ugly." Back at her cabin, Eleanor tucked sleeping children before addressing the evening's events. Jonas had walked her home, a new routine developing since the Thompson. "Emergency? You handled that well," she told him at her doorstep. "We handled it," he corrected. "Your words diffused what knife couldn't have alone." The recognition of partnership struck deeper than similar acknowledgements had before. They stood in comfortable silence, winter stars brilliant overhead, until Eleanor spoke words that had been building since the trading post conversation. "You were right yesterday, about truth being less risky than denial." Jonas waited, not pushing, giving her space to find her own words. "I've been afraid," she continued. "Afraid of caring again, of being hurt, of upending the children's stability. But also," she paused, gathering courage, "afraid of what this settlement would think, how it might affect our position here." "Position changes with railroad," Jonas observed. "Connections and acceptance shift when prosperity arrives." "True, but some things transcend circumstances." She met his gaze directly. "What's built between us? Partnership, trust, respect. That's real, regardless of winter isolation or summer possibilities." Jonas stepped closer, the calculated distance finally abandoned. "Yes," he agreed simply. The word carried weight beyond its simplicity. Standing there in moonlight, Eleanor recognized they'd moved beyond careful boundaries into acknowledgement of something genuine and growing. "We should proceed carefully," she said. "For the children's sake, for community harmony, carefully." "Yes," Jonas agreed, "but honestly," Eleanor nodded. Honestly, the night had grown late, demanding rest before tomorrow's challenges. Yet as they parted, not with the formal distance of previous evenings, but with the warmth of acknowledged connection, Eleanor felt they'd crossed another threshold. Change approached Pine Ridge Crossing from multiple directions. The railroad, promising prosperity, spring eventually thawing winter's grip, and her own heart finally allowing warmth to seep through carefully constructed walls. Tomorrow would bring new decisions, new challenges, new opportunities to test their emerging relationship. But tonight, Eleanor slept with the first true peace she'd known since losing Thomas. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time, that uncertainty felt filled with possibility rather than fear. In his cabin across the settlement, Jonas perhaps felt similarly. Two lives, once separated by loss and circumstance, now gradually intertwining, like the first green shoots pushing through melting snow. Winter's end approached, and with it, the chance to discover what truth their connection might reveal when, tested by the full light of spring, late February brought the railroad survey team, 5 men with measuring equipment, maps, and promises of progress. George Harrison, the chief surveyor, proved a thoughtful man whose military bearing suggested shared experience with Jonas's past service. "Mr. Walker," Harrison greeted Jonas directly, having been briefed by Wilson. "Your cavalry scouting record precedes you. We could use someone who knows these passes intimately." The offer came with substantial compensation, enough to secure proper homestead status anywhere in the territory. Jonas accepted with characteristic restraint, though Eleanor caught the satisfaction in his eyes. Respect and employment without conditions, a rare gift for a man balanced between worlds. As surveyor escort duty pulled Jonas away daily, Eleanor found herself missing their steady partnership. The trading post felt different without his quiet presence, his careful organization, his occasional dry observations that made her smile. "Mama's distracted," Mary observed one evening during supper. At nearly 7, her perceptiveness continued to amaze and occasionally unsettle Eleanor. "Just planning for changes," Eleanor deflected. "Railroad will bring many new things to Pine Ridge." "Mr. Jonas too?" Tommy asked hopefully. The direct question struck Eleanor's careful evasions. How to explain to children that their guide, their protector, their mothers? What exactly? Partner? Friend? Something more that society struggled to categorize? "Mr. Jonas will stay as long as his work requires," she answered diplomatically. "Good," Tommy declared with simple child logic. "He makes you smile different." Eleanor's heart caught. Children noticed everything, processed with innocence that sometimes perceived truth more clearly than adults managed. That truth demanded attention 3 days later when the railroad survey revealed an optimal route passing directly through the southern edge of Pine Ridge, precisely where Eleanor's cabin stood. Harrison broke the news with regret. The rail needs to follow the gentlest grade. Your cabin sits exactly where the line must go. Eleanor felt the ground shifting beneath her again. Here, where she'd found sanctuary, built new life, discovered unexpected connection. The railroad promised prosperity, but threatened displacement. How long? She asked, surprised by her own calm. Construction begins late spring. You'd need to relocate by summer. Jonas appeared as Harrison departed, perhaps drawn by the surveyors. Gravity. Problem. Railroad route, Eleanor explained. Cabin must move. Something flickered in Jonas's expression, determination replacing initial concern. There are other locations, better ones. Better how? Come see. He led her to a small rise overlooking the trading post. This land, unclaimed, strong foundation, water access, view of both trails. He gestured across the vista. Room 4, teaching building 2, your own school if you want. The vision he painted struck Eleanor powerfully. Not just relocation, but expansion, taking their forced change and transforming it into opportunity. You've thought about this, she realized. Thought about many things, he admitted. Future here, what it could hold. Their eyes met with understanding, that transcended words. The land he showed her could support more than a cabin. It could support a true home, whatever form that might take. That evening, as winter's last storm approached, Eleanor gathered the settlement for discussion. The railroad's implications affected everyone. Prosperity and disruption intertwined. Change is sure, Wilson acknowledged, but we've proven adaptable. Some changes provide opportunity, Jonas added quietly. Several heads turned, his public. Comments remained rare. Better trade routes mean established community, school, proper medical resources, and more, permanent population. Eleanor contributed, finding her place in the conversation. Pine Ridge could become actual town, not just winter refuge. The meeting generated lists of needed improvements, plans for embracing rather than resisting the coming transformation. Eleanor noticed how naturally she and Jonas contributed ideas, their partnership now public knowledge that few questioned. As residents dispersed, Margaret Walsh approached Eleanor privately. I spoke hastily before, the older widow acknowledged. Judge circumstances without understanding them, Eleanor offered genuine smile. Winter isolation teaches many lessons. Indeed, Margaret glanced at Jonas, who maintained respectful distance while waiting. Some partnerships transcend social expectations when built on genuine foundation. The acknowledgement felt like blessing, rather than judgment. Eleanor recognized the community accepting what she and Jonas had discovered, that connection formed through shared trials proved stronger than conventional boundaries. Winter's final storm raged with dramatic intensity, as if protesting spring's inevitable victory. Eleanor secured their cabin against howling winds, grateful for Jonas's earlier improvements. The children, accustomed now to Wyoming's temperament, played quietly with wooden toys, while storm sounds provided dramatic backdrop. Evening brought unexpected visitor, Jonas at their door, carrying covered basket. Storm trapped us all, he explained. Thought shared meal better than eating alone. Eleanor welcomed him inside, heart warming at the gesture. Together they prepared simple feast from the basket's contents. Smoked venison, winter vegetables, bread still warm from the trading post kitchen. Like family dinner, Tommy observed happily. Mary studied the scene with her characteristic thoughtfulness. Are we becoming family? She asked directly. Both adults paused, mid-motion. Leave it to children to voice questions, adults danced around. Family forms different ways, Jonas responded carefully. Through blood, choice, shared experience. We've shared much, Eleanor added, glancing at Jonas, and we'll share more, he concluded. The simple exchange felt like recognition, acceptance, promise. As they ate together, 2 adults, 2 children, creating warmth against winter's fury, Eleanor understood they'd already created family of sorts. The formal definitions could follow at their own pace. Later, after children slept and quiet companionship replaced conversation, Jonas spoke thoughtfully. Harrison mentioned continued work with railroad, setting permanent survey markers, mapping secondary routes. Steady employment, Eleanor encouraged. Yes, he hesitated, unusual uncertainty showing, but also traveling, away from Pine Ridge, away from... The pause held everything he didn't say. The children would miss their teacher of knots, Eleanor said lightly, though her heart felt anything but light. Only them. The question hung between them with all its implications. Eleanor moved closer, abandoning pretense of casual conversation. No, she admitted simply, not only them. Jonas reached across small distance, his hand covering hers. The touch felt natural after months of careful avoidance, yet electric with acknowledged possibility. Eleanor, he began, then caught himself, using her name again. The intimacy felt deliberate now, chosen rather than accidental. When I found you in the storm, I thought I was saving 3 lives. Didn't realize I was beginning to save my own. The confession resonated deeply. We saved each other, she corrected, continue saving each other daily. Outside, wind reached crescendo before beginning to fade. The storm's peak passed, leaving gentler snowfall and promise of clearing tomorrow. Eleanor recognized metaphor in weather's pattern, the worst of winter's trials behind them, spring's possibilities ahead. Whatever comes, she said firmly, we face together. The railroad, the changes, the future, all of it. Jonas nodded, fingers intertwining with hers in silent promise. Dawn revealed transformed landscape, storm's final artistic statement before spring's inevitable victory. Sunlight on fresh snow created brilliance that made the children gasp with wonder. "Mama!" Mary called from the window. "Everything's different again." Eleanor joined her daughter, Jonas quietly approaching to complete their tableau. The familiar had indeed transformed overnight, just as their own lives had metamorphosed through winter's trials. Different can be beautiful, Eleanor told her children, speaking truth that encompassed far more than scenery. Below them, Pine Ridge Crossing began stirring. Smoke from chimneys, residents checking storm damage, signs of community persisting. Despite nature's challenge, and beyond, barely visible, the stakes marking railroad surveys promised change that would reshape their isolated settlement forever. But through the window's frame, Jonathan Walker, standing close, 2 children gazing. At world's beauty, Eleanor, finally opening her heart to love and hope again, reflected a different kind of transformation, one built not by external forces, but by choices made in darkness that brought light. The winter that had stripped away everything comfortable had gifted them something far more valuable. The knowledge that human connection could flourish in impossible circumstances, that partnerships forged in adversity carried strength beyond expectation, that love discovered in harsh testing proved more enduring than comfort could ever nurture. As neighbors called greetings about storms passing, as railroad work beckoned with promise and challenge, as spring approached with its gentle thaw, Eleanor Barker stood surrounded by her rebuilt family, not defined by loss, but by unexpected discovery. The Apache tracker, who had crossed her path in winter's worst fury, had become far more than rescuer. Through shared survival, he'd revealed that isolation's greatest danger wasn't weather or wilderness, but the walls people built around wounded hearts. Those walls, like winter ice, eventually yielded to persistent warmth. And what emerged? Trust, partnership, affection, and perhaps something deeper still would carry them forward into whatever trials or triumphs awaited in the valley below. Pine Ridge Crossing's story would continue evolving. Railroad towns attracted crowds, prosperity demanded adjustments, seasons turned their inevitable wheel. But at its heart would remain the truth discovered by a widow and her children, guided by a solitary man whose own losses had prepared him to recognize salvation when it knocked at his cabin door. Together they had survived winter's worst. Together they would build whatever spring promised. And in years to come, when the railroad made Pine Ridge a proper town, when the children grew tall and strong, when community leaders discussed the settlement's founding stories, they would speak of the widow and the tracker who proved that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single desperate step into the unknown, guided by nothing more than hope and humanity shared between strangers. For in the end, Eleanor had discovered winter's greatest gift wasn't survival itself, but the capacity for new beginnings, rising like morning light from winter's darkest night. The story had ended where it truly began, with a door opening to possibility and hearts brave enough to cross its threshold. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.